well, what I'm going to present today is basically what me and Amar and other colleagues have been doing the last 3 years, more or less, trying to connect how different discourses regarding security and insecurity has been circulating between Latin America and the Middle East. And also right now, including a new actor in the last years, I would say, the Chinese are also coming over and trying to enter the dialogue in the end of the day, not substituting Middle East, for example, actors in Latin America, but also engaging with them in a sort of bizarre enmeshment that we are trying to discover what's happening right now. I'm really bad on those kind of things, so I did it yesterday, so anyway, avoid me this sort of things. Anyway, we also got a lot of this research and project now reunited in a new book that's coming over next month, I think. The Tropical Silk Road by Stanford University Press, where we try to organize how this new Chinese dialogue is actually emerging in the region and how creating a lot of different perspectives there. I think we can send some copies to you guys. Anyway, our students are going to pirate and put the PDF online anyway, so you can also download it. But yeah, if you could buy it would be quite interesting. Yes. But anyway, what we're trying to do in the end of the day is actually how Global South countries, and also we can discuss later how we describe Global South here, are actually engaging in a lot of production of knowledge and of concepts regarding security and insecurity, but of course take into account a different perspective regarding epistemology, I would say even ontology in some of the cases, trying not also to look at those areas as being reproducing concepts coming from the north, but are actually producing this kind of things. In the sense, I think the first point is trying to avoid the laboratory paradigm, and this is of course based in a large theoretical work being done, especially by Amar in the last years regarding the security archipelago, in the sense that the Global South is not a laboratory where concepts being produced by the North are being tested, but also areas where security concepts, strategies, and even tactical forms of security are being formed and created. For example, Amar has been exploring how Egypt and Brazil for the last decades is actually creating moral structures of policing that are actually being created there in Brazil and Egypt in a sort of really complex dialogue, and afterwards going back to the North. And there have been, of course, a lot of discussions about neoliberalism in Chile and how it was actually emergent and created there and not just reproducing concepts from the North. And I think this is also quite interesting because we can actually witness some tactical movements being reproduced right now. For example, military policemen from Brazil coming over to New York to teach NIPD officials how to deal with crowd control and stuff like this. So it's not the other way around. It actually has, for example, we've been discussing the floating of weapons and stuff like this from the north to the south, but actually how agents in the south has been dealing with this kind of things. And of course, we are trying to engage in a more complex and interesting scenario, not only state-centric, but also how a large number of different actors, or parastatal actors, like Amar like to describe, has been dealing with this. So we're not dealing only with political actors or the state, but also how companies, NGOs, and a large number of specialists are actually engaging in this kind of things. So we have right now this sort of constellation of actors engaging and dealing with each other. And like Amar explained in the beginning, we don't really are now engaged in a sort of perspective, a theoretical perspective of this binary between state and non-state actors. We are trying to move away from this. And in the end of the day, trying to understand, for example, how militias are being part of what we call the institutionalized space and then going after in different modes. But anyway, if we look how Global South countries has been trying to engage in different creation of concepts regarding security and insecurity, of course, this is not related to a specific political group. For example, for quite some time, Lula was engaged in different Middle Eastern countries like Iran and also Egypt, tried to describe what would be a sort of interesting points regarding security. We were able to interview, for example, Lula's foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs, Celso Amorim, and he was quite vocal describing how he was engaging, for example, partners in Egypt, even in Lebanon, on how security could be addressed in this sense. So there is a lot of conversation going around this. But of course, I would say the most explicit conversation right now is being done by far-right groups in the Global South regarding especially Bolsonaro in the last years and Netanyahu in Israel. And this is related not only because there is a sense of evangelical groups rising in Brazil, like Amar mentioned before. Brazil is basically being run right now by a sort of evangelical cult, I would say. And they are really connected to Israel by a lot of eschatological perspectives and also protection of the West and all this kind of interesting narratives we can discuss later. But anyway, in the last years, basically what Bolsonaro is trying to do is say that Israel and Brazil is somehow connected, not only spiritually, but regarding the threats. So, for example, they make all these weird connections between Hamas and native groups in Brazil, that they are talking all the time and they have been chatting on Skype and all this kind of crazy stuff that do resonate in Brazilian community in the sense that create a sort of all-powerful terrorists coming over or circulating on those spaces. And this is, of course, also materializing in some technical and specifically materials right now. For example, Rio de Janeiro, Israel just signed an accord to basically use a lot of different cameras all across some neighborhoods using Israeli algorithms trying to predict when crime is supposed to happen. You can imagine those algorithms, of course, are not neutral, and what kind of guys are supposed to be addressed by those algorithms on the street. But anyway, it's creating a lot of interesting modes of production of insecurity also because, like we are saying, we're not only interested on the state. In Rio, I hope we can do one of those conferences in Rio one of these days. It's still quite safe, I swear to you. But anyway, we have this sort of evangelical militias combining narco-trafficking groups and this sort of evangelical perspective. And they, for instance, the biggest one like to be called the Israeli complex, because it's formed not only by narco-traffickers using weapons and all those kind of things, but also by pastors who were living in Jerusalem during the last 20 years. So they come now to Rio and create all this narrative and imagination regarding how those two sacred cities are being attacked by the outside forces, and how we can only, by the combination of discourses regarding security and the technique, address these kind of things. So it's a bit bizarre, but this is really happening right now, and in this sense has been quite interesting to actually map those products of vigilance and also the weapons and how the narrative between how the two cities are being attacked by the outside forces. So this is a kind of grim and bizarre scenario, and in the end of the day we try to realize what other resistant groups are actually doing there on the field, in the sense that, well, although some of the state-sponsored arguments are being played out that there is an Israeli-Brazil alliance dealing with enemies of the state and stuff like this, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, especially because in the last 6 or 7 years, a new actor emerged, that's China. And one could say that, well, China will substitute, for example, Israel in this sense, but what we were able to witness was actually an engagement between Chinese and Israel trying to deal with Brazil right now, creating this sort of incredible, bizarre constellation in this sense. As you can imagine, with our book, we were focusing, especially in the Amazon rainforest, not only in Brazil, but also in Ecuador, try to understand how this China new model of production, of economy, of extractivism is also being spilled over to security areas, especially regarding buying new security products, but also Chinese specialists coming over to Brazil and engaging in discussion about what is security. So this is especially related to China, if I may focus on the Amazon, because, well, Brazil is quite scared regarding environmental protection and how this can become somehow an excuse for imperialist forces to invade Brazil. And this can sound a bit bizarre, but maybe, I think 3 months ago, I was at Brazilian War College having a talk for our 20 most graduate colonels, and I asked them how many of them believe that the US want to steal the Amazon, and I emphasized the verb, the steal, and 90% of them raised their hands, and they are quite sure the US are using a lot of environmental discourses to basically steal the Amazon like it's a piece of meat you can put in a purse and run away to Detroit or something like this. For example, from time to time, we have this map circulating. It's obviously false. It's a fake representation of a Brazilian map that has been used in US schools that show the Amazon rainforest as an international area. So this role has been, this discourse has been played for quite some time. And when China in the last 5 years became the largest partner economically of Brazil, it was quite clever to create a sort of discourse related to security that Chinese will respect Brazil's sovereignty and is not going to repeat France or the US discourse that we are destroying the forest, and sometimes if we're not responsible regarding this, we should and we could be invaded. So this sounds quite well for Bolsonaro, although he is not really fond of the Chinese for quite some time because he was in love with Trump. Right now, this looks quite good because, well, they're respecting our sovereignty. When we engage in security discussions, we're engaging, for example, in investments. They don't create all these funny small letters that somehow can be problematic for us in the future. So in the last years, we have been witnessing the emergence of a Chinese model of production and extraction in the Amazon rainforest, really connected to a sort of protecting Brazilian sovereignty and protecting, in the end of the day, the Brazilian interests in there. And this is, of course, related to what you probably noticed in the last years. Bolsonaro has been quite criticized for not really taking care of any environmental discussion. France and the US has been quite vocal on how Brazil has been quite irresponsible regarding this. So he comes China in the sense, not only supporting Brazil of being the one responsible and violated by those places, but also now engaging in a sort of armed trade deals and a lot of discussion regarding border control. And this comes also engaging with Israel in the sense, especially regarding border control and how the borders are porous and cannot be controlled, and we should somehow import Israeli machines to deal with this area. So anyway, then what we tried to do in the end was, well, there are a bunch, an incredible group of indigenous resistance movements that are now fighting back against those new extractivist models regarding not only hydroelectric being constructed in the Amazon basins, but also removing of indigenous community. So being quite worried about what those groups have to say, and especially take into account that they have been quite scared in the last years of how different academics is basically stealing their ideas and not including them in that discussion. In the last 3 years, I think we were quite happy to announce that we were able to engage with them, not only being able to hear and engage in this conversation, but also to include them in the book. So we have several articles being made by leaders from indigenous communities in that area, specifically creating concepts specifically regarding security, risk, and how they manage this discussion regarding the Chinese and Israel presence now in the Amazon with the Brazilian extractivist new model, and how they are quite sophisticated to understand this kind of things. So I would like to present briefly one of those groups, the Munduruku. They are like around 18,000, and they're specifically in the area where now the Chinese are operating in the Amazon rainforest. And we were able to have a large number of sessions with them discussing how they understand and how they actually engage with the Chinese workers now in the Amazon rainforest, not only in Brazil but also in Ecuador because they are in the border, but also with the Brazilian government. And in the end of the day, what we were I think what was quite interesting to understand here is that they don't really see also in a sort of binary. They don't like the Chinese or the Brazilian state. They are engaged in a quite sophisticated methods of accommodation and discussion on how those new products of extraction are dealing with them. And what is quite interesting, those groups, they are also engaging with academia right now. They are sending, for example, some leaders to be undergrad students and doing graduate students in the Amazon, also in Rio de Janeiro. So they're engaging in a sort of really interesting and potent, I would say, product and concepts regarding what is security, what for them specifically security means for protection and risk, and how they're engaging with different actors like the Chinese, the Israel, and Brazilian in this sense. So it's for us, it's a mind-blowing perspective being able to actually engage in this sort of conversation. We have incredible conversation regarding how we translate them for English, for example. We spend hours and hours, this is specific, how we're supposed to translate this. So it's been incredible. And of course, I think it's really connected to the security context in the end of the day and how to bring up those voices in a sort of really potent and interesting way. And last but not least, what I think is absurdly amazing also is that since they are now engaging in this incredible conversation regarding Chinese and Israel and Brazil, they are now looking abroad to look for partners and allies, to create alliances to resist this kind of things. So regarding Palestine, for example, here it's a Mundukuru activist in Brasilia. The signs say, Fora Bolsonaro, out with Bolsonaro, and she's waving the Palestinian flag, because they're trying now to connect Palestinians in Europe and actually in Palestine, and try to engage in a sort of circuit of resistance and regarding not only strategies or what to do to deal with those equipments that are now flying the Amazon, but also discourses, narratives, and a lot of interesting impulses. And again, this is not binary because they don't say, well, we're not going to discuss and deal with Israel, but creating a whole new constellation of actors and on their own terms, on their own concepts, and try to engage with other products. So anyway, what we do have right now is this. You can imagine this is also creating different models of discussion because we are also engaging, for example, quilombolas, the traditional Maroons communities in Brazil. So now we are putting the same table in the same book, activists from black communities in Rio de Janeiro, from the favelas, with those guys in the Amazon, and they are actually creating their own concepts. I think Amar described some of them, and try to create this sort of commonalities and discussion. And it's just been an incredible moment when, for example, they try to describe some of what they're doing regarding Hobbes and Weber and all these kind of things, which is, I think, absurdly interesting, especially engaging in their own voices and be able to reproduce what they're saying, not through a filter of academic in the end of the day. So that's where we are right now. We are really excited after the release of the book to actually create these roundtables, bringing them over, not only in Brazil, but also here to the US. They're quite excited to come over. Me and Amar have been discussing, because some of them, they do want the publicity. They want to, we should go to Congress and stuff like this. And the others are, no, don't even put my name. We have to put nicknames on the article. So we've been engaging in something that we discussed yesterday, and how to be quite responsible to this kind of things, because, well, Brazil right now is the country that killed the most indigenous leaders in the world by far. So some of them, no, I want to be there. I want to run for Congress, for example, and this will be great publicity. And the others, no, we don't. Just put a nickname, and somehow we try to engage these kind of things. And right now, this also... sorry?
3 of our authors are now running for Congress
yes,
in Brazil.
That's right.
And 4 are running for local office in Ecuador.
Yeah.
These are all indigenous and subaltern activists. So
yeah, it's got to be
pretty amazing moment ahead.
It is. And what I think it's also incredible is also engaging those leaders with other resistant groups. So, for example, now they're using a lot of Palestinian symbols and narratives. So somehow I think this is also creating a complex scenario where we can engage and we can discuss not only political, practical stuff, but also, I would say, epistemological and even ontological discussions. So I think that's where we are right now. I think my objective here in the end of the day was also to present to you guys what we are doing and how important has been this whole theoretical perspective to engage with those actors. And hopefully next time we'll bring some of them so they can talk by themselves and actually present to you the concepts. Thank you.